Hello and good morning from the Freedom of Information and Privacy Association. I'm Patrick Farnsworth. This is your Access and Privacy Online News Summary for Saturday, May 9th. This week we begin with the still unfolding Alberta voter list breach, where nearly 3 million electors' personal information may have been exposed through a searchable database tied to separatist organizing. The latest developments now include investigations by Elections Alberta, the RCMP, and Alberta's Privacy Commissioner, along with serious questions about whether recent changes to Alberta election law made it harder for the watchdog to act sooner. We'll also look at the national implications of that breach, including why FIPA and civil society partners launched VoterPrivacy.ca and are calling for real privacy rules for political parties. On Access to Information, we track major transparency concerns in Ontario and Newfoundland and Labrador, a quick note on developments in BC, and how access leads to better accountability, revealing public health, education, and governance issues across the country. Don't forget you can find links to all the reporting that informs these summaries in our show notes. Let's dive in. We begin in Alberta, where the voter list breach story continues to expand. The Globe and Mail reports that Elections Alberta and the RCMP are now investigating the alleged misuse of Alberta's list of electors after a separatist group, the Centurion Project, operated a searchable database containing the names and addresses of nearly 3 million Albertans. Elections Alberta also said Albertans should be wary of texts from unknown parties claiming to be able to help reclaim private information. Elections Alberta told the court that data appeared to trace back to a voter list lawfully provided to the Republican Party of Alberta. But under Alberta election law, those lists can only be used by authorized recipients for limited political purposes and cannot be shared with third parties. The agency has yet to confirm how the list managed to change hands. A judge has now ordered the Centurion Project to take the database down. The group has said it will comply with the investigation. But the story has quickly moved beyond the takedown. A key question is why Elections Alberta did not act sooner. Journalist Jen Gershon flagged concerns to the agency in March, but Elections Alberta said it could not launch a formal investigation at that point because of a 2025 legislative change that raised the threshold for investigations to reasonable grounds to believe an offense had occurred. Elections Alberta says that standard is close to what police need before making an arrest, much higher than the previous threshold. The chief electoral officer had warned the government last year that the change could effectively require complainants to bring forward a nearly completed investigation before the watchdog could begin its own work. The government disputes that interpretation. An official claim the Act says investigations can take place if the Elections Commissioner has reasonable grounds to believe there was an offense. Premier Danielle Smith has said her government will wait for the results of the Elections Alberta and RCMP investigations before deciding whether legislative changes are needed. Meanwhile, the political fallout continues. The opposition NDP says a United Conservative Party caucus staffer and 80 other attendees that appear to be connected to the UCP attended an April 16th virtual meeting where the Centurion Project demonstrated the database. According to the NDP, a search displayed former Premier Jason Kenney's home address. The NDP says it reported the matter to the RCMP the next day and questioned why the UCP didn't. Smith says she only learned of the breach through media reports and argues the NDP should have warned the government directly. NDP leader Naheed Nenshi says calling police was the appropriate step, especially given past political links between Smith and the Centurion Project leader David Parker. The breach has also raised immediate safety concerns. An Edmonton city councillor says his office is helping a woman fleeing intimate partner violence relocate after her address was exposed. Other Edmontonians whose safety and lives have been affected are coming forward as well. Kenney has said he is seeking legal advice. Alberta's Privacy Commissioner, Diane McLeod, has warned the breach could put public officials, law enforcement, survivors of violence, and vulnerable individuals at risk. Prime Minister Mark Carney called the alleged breach deeply concerning, saying the rights of Canadians and the integrity of democratic processes must be protected with vigilance. Compounding the issue is the increasing evidence that foreign actors in the United States and Russia are fueling separatist debate in Canada, and that social media and personal information are at the center of these campaigns. The central issue is now clear. This was not reported as a hack of Elections Alberta systems. The concern is that voter data lawfully given to a political party has intentionally and easily moved outside lawful controls. And that is exactly where privacy and election law, partisan politics, and democratic integrity collide. FIPA has been warning that voter privacy cannot depend on trust alone. In response to the Alberta breach, FIPA is calling for enforceable privacy rights, independent oversight, and stronger protections against the misuse of voter data. The concern is straightforward. If a list of electors can allegedly move from an authorized political recipient to a searchable database hosted by a third-party group, the risk is immediate and concrete. The public should not be reassured simply because an election agency was not hacked. Privacy protection must be applied and follow voter data wherever it goes. Elections Alberta describes the list of electors as extremely sensitive data. It can include names, addresses, postal codes, telephone numbers, unique identifier numbers, electoral divisions, and voting areas. For some people, that information is not just private, it is safety critical. That includes survivors of intimate partner and sexual violence, public officials, election workers, law enforcement personnel, candidates, volunteers, and members of targeted communities. Alberta's Privacy Commissioner has now launched an investigation into the Centurion Project under the Personal Information Protection Act. The investigation will examine whether the group had authority to collect, use, or disclose the personal information if it had reasonable security arrangements, and whether breach notification obligations apply. The OIPC has also issued a public FAQ after receiving more than 180 emails and calls from concerned Albertans. But the Commissioner has been equally clear about the bigger gap. Alberta's private sector privacy law does not apply to political parties, so it may not have jurisdiction to act. Commissioner McLeod says political parties should be brought under FIPA, a reform her office has sought for decades and that FIPA has also supported. That is where this provincial case becomes a national warning. FIPA has drawn the connection and warned about the risks of the misuse of personal information in the political process for years, and recently made stronger connections to it fueling foreign interference. FIPA and partners launched VoterPrivacy.ca because these risks exist at both the provincial and federal level. Ipsos polling conducted for FIPA, the Canadian Civil Liberties Association, the Centre for Digital Rights, and Open Media found that only 10% of Canadians prefer self-regulation for federal political parties, while 68% support legislative privacy requirements with strong, independent oversight. Open Media has joined calling the Alberta breach a warning sign. Executive Director Matt Hatfield says millions of Albertans have now seen what happens when political parties remain outside real privacy law, and that Parliament should act before the next federal election, not after the next breach. FIPA is encouraging Canadians concerned about political privacy to visit VoterPrivacy.ca, that is VoterPrivacy.ca, and sign House of Commons petition E-7237, which calls for enforceable privacy obligations, meaningful access rights, and independent oversight for political parties. Because privacy policies alone don't ensure people's privacy rights are protected. Canadians need the right to know what information political parties hold about them, the right to correct inaccurate information, have meaningful safeguards, breach notification, and independent recourse when things go wrong. And so again, please be sure to visit voterprivacy.ca for more information, and look down in the show notes for all the links to this material. Turning to Canadian privacy and artificial intelligence. Federal and provincial privacy regulators have found OpenAI did not respect Canadian privacy laws when developing ChatGPT. The joint investigation involved Privacy Commissioner of Canada, Philippe Dufresne, and his counterparts in British Columbia, Alberta, and Quebec. Regulators found OpenAI's collection of personal information to train its models was broad and could include sensitive details about health, political views, and children. They also found OpenAI did not clearly explain that personal information collected from publicly accessible sources could include data from social media, discussion forums, and similar websites. It was found that OpenAI provided inadequate notifications about potential inaccuracies in ChatGPT responses and didn't conduct any assessments to validate the accuracy of any personal information included in responses until recently. The investigation also found gaps in access, correction, and deletion rights. Commissioner Dufresne says OpenAI has agreed to implement measures that will limit personal information used to train new ChatGPT models and better protect Canadians' fundamental right to privacy. Meanwhile, an anonymous Canadian online critic of President Donald Trump is suing the United States Department of Homeland Security after it tried to compel Google to disclose information about him. In a situation that has previously been alleged to occur only with foreign adversaries, the plaintiff says the United States government is seeking extensive information about his Google accounts, including his identity, location, browsing history, and physical movements. Google said it hasn't released the information yet, but it can't hold out forever. The American Civil Liberties Union says the case raises serious concerns about privacy, anonymity, and political speech, especially when a foreign government uses legal tools to identify critics abroad. And on transnational repression, University of Ottawa professor Thomas Juneau told a House subcommittee he's seeing an uptick in Iran's government threatening the diaspora in Canada. The committee is studying Canada's response to foreign governments targeting diaspora communities and said we can expect transnational repression against Iranian Canadians to get significantly worse. Witnesses raised concerns about surveillance, threats to relatives abroad, and gaps in Canada's coordinated response. That issue also intersected with controversy over a former Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps official, which is listed as a terrorist organization, who was initially granted a visa to attend a FIFA-related event in Vancouver. The immigration minister says she is accountable, but was not involved in the decision. The government says the visa was annulled before the official entered Canada, while opposition MPs argue privacy rules should not prevent answers about how the approval happened. In more local news, in Nova Scotia, LGI reporter Rosemary Godden at the Cape Breton Post reports that Member 2 First Nation is resetting its cannabis law process after deciding more community participation is needed, and after the province gave notice that it would more vigorously enforce its cannabis law last fall. A previous draft focused on safety, self-government, licensing, zoning, and quality control. But Member 2 leaders now want additional input from adult community members before any law proceeds to a vote. The process highlights the intersection of Indigenous governance, public health, community consultation, and personal information protection, with survey organizers saying no personal information will be shared. In British Columbia, LGI reporter Lexi McFarlane at the Times-Chronicle reports that Oliver Council has approved updates to its video surveillance policy. The revised policy clarifies responsibility for compliance, audits, system management, signage, and access logs. The policy also gives a requirement to first determine if the cameras are truly necessary where proposed. It also requires council approval and a privacy impact assessment before new cameras are installed. The policy now more clearly defines prohibited spaces and aligns the town's approach with privacy obligations under British Columbia's public sector privacy law. Staying in Oliver, McFarlane also reports that Council has adopted a new artificial intelligence policy for town workplaces. The policy defines confidential, identifiable, personal, and sensitive information and limits approved AI use to Microsoft Copilot on town-issued devices. Its goal is to reduce legal, operational, privacy, and reputational risks as AI becomes more common in municipal work. One counselor pointed out that even tools like Google use AI, and that it's been integrating into our way of life. The policy covers responsible use and oversight, transparency, privacy protections, and governance. And finally, in this segment, the conversation warns that Canada may not be ready for surveillance pricing. Also called algorithmic personalized pricing, the practice uses personal data such as browsing history, location, device, postal code, or purchase patterns to estimate how much a person is willing to pay. The concern is not just that prices change, It is that two shoppers could see different prices for the same product at the same time based on data they cannot see. The article notes that Canadian law circles the problem through competition, consumer protection, and privacy rules, but no framework fully captures the fairness issue. Manitoba has introduced legislation to prohibit surveillance pricing, but the federal government says it is looking into the issue. Now to access information across Canada. In Ontario, LGI reporter Paige Seburn at the Lake Report brings us a story that opposition MPP Wayne Gates is warning new Freedom of Information rules in Ontario will keep the public in the dark. The changes passed through Bill 97 mean people can no longer use FOI requests to obtain records from the Premier's office or cabinet ministers' offices, even when those records relate to government decisions. The change also applies retroactively. Gates points to the Greenbelt scandal and Doug Ford's cell phone record as two examples of why access to records matter. FOI requests help uncover how government decisions were made and who benefited. Critics say the new law cuts access to political offices where key decisions are shaped, and they argue it was passed without proper hearings or public consultation. Also in Ontario, LGI reporter Roger Verley at the Uxbridge Cosmos reports that about 50 people attended a rainy protest outside Finance Minister Peter Bethlen-Falvey's constituency office in Pickering while the office was closed. Participants criticized the Ford government over a range of issues, including the Greenbelt, Ontario Place, the Ontario Science Centre, healthcare, education, autism services, and what they call the province's Freedom of Information scandal. The protest shows how access to information concerns are now being folded into broader public frustration over accountability and democratic process. In Newfoundland and Labrador, LGI reporter Justin Brake at The Independent reports that the province failed to make public more than 1,000 access to information responses in a single fiscal year. The province's own data show that between April 2024 and March 2025, the ATIP office received 1,741 access requests, but only 727 responses were posted online, fewer than 42%. While provincial legislation doesn't compel the government to post completed FOI requests on its website, the government's own policy states it will publish completed requests. The government says rising request volumes and review obligations have slowed publication, but access users and opposition politicians say the failure undermines transparency, especially when completed requests are supposed to be made available so the public does not have to ask for the same information again. In Alberta, LGI reporter Nicholas L.M. Allen at the Crow's Nest Pass Herald reports that Crow's Nest Pass Council has passed an updated fees and charges bylaw, while rejecting a proposal to reduce the fee for electronic council meeting recordings. A councillor argued that meeting recordings are critical public information, especially while meetings are not being live-streamed. After debate, the fee of $25 for access to those records has been maintained. In Ontario, LGI reporter Danielle Pittman at AureliaMatters.com reports that Ramara's deputy mayor has requested a feasibility report on a third-party review of the township's financial systems. The motion asks the CAO to outline scope, timing, and costs for an independent review of water and wastewater operations, financial systems, and the governance framework for Lagoon City Parks and Waterways Commission. Council also discussed better updates on litigation, including when information should be public and when it should remain confidential. In British Columbia, LGI reporter Michelle Gamage at the Tyee reports that hundreds of patients are experiencing non-fatal overdoses at Surrey Memorial Hospital every year, according to data obtained through a Freedom of Information request. The records show 2,066 non-fatal overdoses at Surrey Memorial between January 2020 and December 2025. Across 12 Fraser Health hospitals, there were 6,280 non-fatal unregulated drug events during that period. The reporting also shows why FOI matters. The Tyee says it has been difficult to obtain comparable data from other health authorities, even though doctors say the information is essential to understanding the need for hospital-based overdose prevention services. The provincial health officer, Dr. Bonnie Henry, said health officials aren't required to report overdoses or drug poisoning events to the province. She stressed how complicated it might be to try to collect this data. FIPA would like to draw attention to the contradictions in this matter. The availability of data in these matters is often used to justify a decades-long state of public health emergency, triggering exceptional powers and the suppression of civil rights. Yet the data that could support the emergency and understand the regional differences is withheld from the public. Moving east, FOI data obtained by the Ontario Teachers Federation show racial, language, and age disparities in Ontario's mandatory teacher math test. The Federation argues the test creates barriers at a time when Ontario needs more teachers, while the province says the requirement ensures teachers are prepared to deliver foundational math skills. Teachers' unions have objected to the test being applied broadly to all teachers. And finally, in the Canadian Access Roundup, LGI reporter Anushka Yadav at The Pointer reports on the political fallout in Caledon after Mayor Annette Groves announced she will step down after a turbulent term and allegedly doing the opposite of what she promised. The story traces public anger over Highway 413, aggregate development, land use decisions, strong mayor powers, and Bill 97's changes to Ontario's Freedom of Information rules. Residents and environmental advocates say decisions affecting land, water, and development have been made with too little transparency. The reporting shows how local access concerns often become broader questions about public trust, planning, and democratic accountability. Now to international access stories. The international jury of the Venice Biennale resigned just days before the contemporary art fair opened, amid tensions over Russia's participation, and the jury's earlier decision not to award prizes to countries accused of crimes against humanity by the International Criminal Court. The dispute also drew in access to information issues. Italy's culture minister said officials visited Venice to collect documents in response to a European Union request for information after funding was cut over Russia's participation. The Biennale has in the past refused pressure to exclude countries, including Iran and Israel, from participating. It says it does not have authority to block any country recognized by Italy from taking part. In Michigan, a family called 911 seeking help for their son during a mental health crisis, only for the situation to escalate into arrest, jail, and a felony conviction. A Freedom of Information Act request after the incident report remains pending. The story examines broader questions about crisis response, police involvement in mental health calls, and whether records and data are available to evaluate what happened and how systems could improve. And in Georgia, an investigation found that state officials knew for years that chemicals from carpet mills were polluting local water, while residents remained in the dark. The investigation found that regulators did little to confront PFAS contamination, even as testing showed pollution in rivers and drinking water. Records obtained through public information laws helped reconstruct what officials knew, when they knew it, and how agencies responded. The records also revealed despite urgent requests to investigate the source of the high PFAS levels, Georgia did not respond in kind. The story is a stark reminder that access to environmental information can be a public health issue, especially when communities are left without clear warnings about risks in the water they drink. Turning to international privacy. Ghana has rejected a proposed health agreement with the United States over data privacy concerns. Ghana's Data Protection Commission says the proposed deal would have allowed U.S. entities broad access to sensitive health data, including metadata, dashboards, reporting tools, and data models without sufficient safeguards or prior approval from Ghana. The proposed agreement would have brought significant U.S. health funding, but Ghana says the scope of data access went far beyond what was necessary. Trump made similar agreements with over 30 countries. However, these have raised questions about data privacy concerns. It is also reported that the agreements sometimes limit who is being helped. Relatedly, Zambia is accusing the United States of tying a $2 billion health assistance deal to access to critical minerals and broad health-sharing data. Zambia's foreign minister says negotiations stalled over data sharing demands that would violate citizens' right to privacy, as well as pressure for preferential treatment for U.S. companies in the minerals sector. Some African leaders and health experts have criticized the new U.S. stance and its demands for sensitive health data in exchange for badly needed support for health systems strained by the Trump administration's dismantling of foreign aid. Together, the Ghana and Zambia stories show a growing global debate over health data sovereignty and whether aid agreements are being used to extract sensitive public health information from lower-income countries. In Idaho, 6 transgender residents are suing the state over what advocates describe as the strictest bathroom ban in the United States. The law, set to take effect in July, could impose jail time on people who knowingly enter a bathroom, locker room, or changing area that does not correspond with their sex assigned at birth. The plaintiffs argue the law violates equality and privacy rights by forcing them to disclose their transgender status or avoid public life. At least 19 states, including Idaho, already have laws barring transgender people from using bathrooms and changing rooms that align with their gender in schools and, in some cases, other public places. In New Mexico, state prosecutors are seeking major child safety restrictions on Meta's apps and algorithms in the second phase of a landmark trial. Meta warned that it could eliminate Instagram and Facebook service in New Mexico if forced to comply. A jury has already ordered $375 million in civil penalties against Meta after finding the company knowingly harmed children's mental health and concealed what it knew about child sexual exploitation on its platforms. Prosecutors now want changes to recommendation algorithms, age verification, default privacy settings, and addictive design features. Meta says the proposed remedies are impractical and raise free speech concerns. And finally, in Georgia, a federal judge has ruled the U.S. Justice Department can keep 2020 election ballots seized from Fulton County. The county argued the seizure was unconstitutional. The judge said the seizure was not perfect, but ruled the county had not shown its rights were disregarded or that the documents must be returned. The case sits alongside broader concerns about federal efforts to obtain election records and voter data, including sensitive personal information. Election officials, including Republicans, in several states have warned that handing over that information could violate privacy laws. Before we go, there's been a lot going on in these files over the past 2 weeks. Some details arriving late this week include Bill 9 seeing some dramatic developments, including opposition conservatives breaking from their national counterparts and fighting for greater access to information rights in British Columbia. Plus, at the federal level, Bill C-25 is advancing through the House of Commons with a series of submissions from civil society and regulators, all highlighting its readily apparent deficiencies, none of which the government or opposition parties want to address. We have an editorial from FIPA President Mike Larson on our website on this, a link to the FIPA submission, and a commentary coming out this week. We'll bring you more on these stories in the week ahead. That's it for this week's Access and Privacy Online News Summary. Thank you for listening, and thank you for following the stories that shape privacy, transparency, and democratic accountability in Canada and around the world. You can find more coverage, resources, and links through FIPA's website and the show notes. You can also support this work by subscribing to our news monitoring, sharing the podcast, or making a donation to help keep these public interest resources available. This episode was written by Sean Fisk. Music is by Breakmaster Cylinder. I'm Patrick Farnsworth for the Freedom of Information and Privacy Association. Thank you again for joining us. Stay safe and stay informed.